In our previous videos, we've made this GPS of plant screen where we can collect GPS details from a plant, although we have not enabled the GPS yet. And we can also enter the plant's name, location, and description. In this video, we're going to see how we can persist the information about the plant so that if we close our app and reopen it, the information will still be there. Now, before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what we need, the tools that we're going to need. First, TinyDB. That's our persistence mechanism. So let's talk about some definitions. What is persistence? Persistent means data continues to live even after your application has closed. So when you reopen the application, the data will still be accessible. This is compared with temporary storage, which is when we just make variables, as we've done before in AppInventor. We declare global or local variables. Those variables get cleared out as soon as we close the application. But with persistent data, the data will remain around the next time we reopen the application. We can persist locally to the SD card, or we can persist to the cloud or the web as well. Oftentimes, it's a good idea to do both. The SD card so that we can operate offline, and then the cloud or web so that we have the same view of data on all of our devices. These days, it's common to have multiple devices, and we expect them to all show the same data. So TinyDB is a simple database on our device. It's a very simple name-value pair-style database. What they call a tag is what I tend to call a name or a key or a unique identifier. Each row in the database has to have a unique tag because that's what we're going to use to retrieve the data later. A value is what we're storing, and that's what's associated with the unique identifier. Now, the value does not need to be unique, but the tag does. So I could have a tag 1, and the value might be Eastern Redbud. Tag 2, value might be Chinese Redbud. Tag 3 might be White Pine. Tag 4 might be Eastern Redbud. So you see that Eastern Redbud gets repeated, but the tag is something that's unique. Now, in this first rough cut, we're going to use the tree name as a tag, which honestly isn't a good idea because we could have multiple trees with the same name. So in a later video, we're going to refactor this and think of a bit of a better name, but this video is just a proof of concept. So what do we need to do? First, we need to add a TinyDB component to our GPS screen. Now, one interesting thing is there is only one TinyDB component in your entire app. So we can add the same TinyDB component to multiple screens if we want to access the data from multiple screens. And sure enough, that's what we're going to do. Next, on the GPS of plant screen, we need to activate the Save button that we made earlier. That's the button with the little floppy disk. What we're going to do is when the user hits Save, we're going to take the plant name and put that into a variable. We're going to take the description and location, put those into 2 variables as well. Then we are going to use that plant name as the tag, the unique identifier, and then we're going to concatenate or combine together the plant name, description, and location into one string, and we're going to use that string as the value that we're associating with the tag. So this is the storage operation. Now let's take a look at the retrieval operation. To show the data in the database, we're going to make a new screen called Plant Specimens. This is going to have something called a list. Actually, it's going to have a list view. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. It's going to have a list view, which is a UI component that shows all of the data from our database, or whatever data we wish to show. So to do this, we have to create something with a similar name, which is called a list. A list is an in-memory variable. Okay, so a variable, and we are going to create this list inside of an initialize block for our plant specimen screen. Now, what's an initialize block? This is an event or a block that gets called when our screen is created. So in other words, navigate to a screen, initialize the screen, create an in-memory list of specimens. Okay, populate that in-memory list from our TinyDB results. Okay, add a list view to the screen. List view is a visual or a UI component where the list is just an in-memory variable, essentially. So associate this in-memory list with the visible list that we will see on the screen, and then make sure we can open this screen from the GPS Applant screen. So create a new screen, initialize block, create an in-memory list, populate the in-memory list from our TinyDB, and then associate that list with a list view component that the user can see on the screen. So let's take a look. For that, we need to go to storage and we need to get TinyDB. Just drag them and drop them anywhere because this is a non-visible component. So I drag him, he's called TinyDB1. I'm going to rename this to specimens because we're actually storing specimens of plants. In other words, a specimen is a plant you can physically touch. And I'll choose OK. Now what we're going to have is when we click the Save button, we are going to store the plant name, location, and description in the specimens database. So with this, I'm going to go to Blocks View. OK. I'm going to take a look at the button, make sure I don't already have a handler set up for it, and it looks like I do not. So I'm going to go to the button. Which button is it? Well, remember, this is why we want to rename variables we're going to program against, so we'll know what they are. In this case, it's button save. So I'm going to grab a handler for when button save click. And what we need to do is we need to get the data out of each of the text components on the screen. So we're going to store them into variables. So I'm going to click on variables. I'm going to choose initialize local name. We're going to say name, we're going to say plant name. And now we're going to say to, let me grab the text field here. It's going to be easiest if we save these variables, if we save these values into variables. So I'm going to click the txt plant name, and what is that? txt plant name is this text box right here. See, it lights up over here, txt plant name. If we want to find the text that the user has typed into txt plant name, I'm going to click it. I'm going to scroll down and look for the attribute txt plant name text, and we will put it just like so. And now we have a variable. Okay, so let's do this a few more times. I'm going to make variables for each of the components, and I probably better drag this to a place where I have a bit more real estate because I know that this block is going to get fairly long. So, okay, txt plant name, and now we're going to say location, and we will repeat location, and we need to get the text. Okay, and we're just going to call this location. Okay, and we'll do one more. We'll get variables, initialize local. Okay, and finally txt description, and then text. Okay, there we go. Drag and drop. Okay, and we're going to call this txt description. On second thought, let's keep it consistent with the others and drop the txt, and we'll just call it description. Now, I need to make a little change here. You see, these local variables are only alive in this little gap that we see. As I have it set up now, these variables are going to be alive for a very short time, and then the next variable will be alive. So in other words, I only have access to plant name within this block. I only have access to location within this block and description within this block. I want access to all three. So I'm going to do a little moving around here. I'm going to nest them. So now in this block right here, I have access to all variables. And I need that because I want to store them into our WebDB, our TinyDB called specimens. So I'm going to grab specimens, and the TinyDB works in the concept of name-value pairs. So in other words, we will associate one value with one unique name, and that's where things are a little bit tricky. Because first of all, the name I want to use or the tag I want to use is the plant name. That's not really unique though. We could have multiple white pines or multiple red maples. So we're going to need to figure out a better tag name. Maybe we could use the GPS with that, but that's okay. We'll save that for a future lecture. The tricky part also is going to be value to store. Because we actually have 3 values we want to store: the plant name, the location, and the description. So we're going to have to get a little tricky there as well. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to drop like so. Now, one possible alternative for our tag would be a number that increments. That would be a more unique identifier because we burn the number after we use it. In other words, we store something with the value 1, and then the next item we store with the value 2, the next item with the value 3, so on and so forth. We'll do that, but we'll discover that in a later video. For now, let's take a look at this tag, and I want to use the plant name. So I'm going to grab this little variable puzzle piece here that will allow me to access any of the variables I've defined up here, and we're going to put in plant name. Now for value to store, remember that we want to store all 3, which is a little tricky as well. So for that, I'm going to need to use some text, and I'm going to need to join some things together. So we'll need to join them together with some kind of concatenation operator. So I'm going to grab a join here. Okay, and we are going to say, okay, what do we want to join? Let's see. We'll see if we can do like so. There we go. So we join 3 strings together, although to be honest with you, it seems like we need to join 3 strings, but we actually need to join 5 strings because we have the plant name, the location, and the description. But then we also have the delimiter that's going to go between these fields. Now, what's a delimiter? I keep saying delimiter. A delimiter is some kind of special character that tells us when one field ends and the other field begins. So we need a delimiter to space out these different things that we're saving. So let me go ahead and make this 5. You see, as I drag the string element in here, the number of little notches here increases as well. Okay, so get plant name and join. Okay, so we're gonna use our variables here. We're gonna say we're gonna start with the plant name. Okay, and then I'm gonna go back to text and I'm gonna use the literal here. What's a good escape character to use? \T indicates a tab. That's oftentimes a good one to use. You could also use a bar or a semicolon. The risk is, what if the text that we're storing also controls that special character or it contains that special character? That's when we get into a bit of risk. Again, we can think through that a bit more, but at this point we're just going for a very simple proof of concept. We're going to assume happy path for the moment. Okay, so plant name, and then we're going to say description, and then let's see, we're going to copy this guy, and there we go, just a simple Control-C, Control-V, and then variables again, and we're going to say get. Oop, there we go. And this time, let's say location. So when I hit save, it's going to save these to my TinyDB. Okay, and for good luck, I'm going to go ahead and save the project as it is now. Okay. And now let's try this out in the emulator. I'm going to connect and choose the emulator. And whoops, I forgot to do the AI starter, so just a moment. I'll pause the video because this will take just a moment. Okay, the emulator's come up. So I'm going to type in Eastern Redbud as the plant name. Let's see, we'll tidy that up just a little bit. Put it in the proper case. Location, let's say Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden, like so. And then we'll scroll down a bit. And for the description, I've typed in an excellent choice, and now I hit save. Okay, a good idea on that save is we should clear out these text fields as well so that we can enter another plant without duplicating. So for this one, let's say red maple. We'll keep it as Cincinnati Zoo and Botanical Garden. And the description, let's change that as well. It's a little tricky getting to that description because the virtual keyboard covers it up, but if I act quickly, I can manage to get my cursor there. And this one will say, we'll talk about its fall. See, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. I'll go ahead and do this part off camera. Okay, and I typed in excellent fall color, and now I choose save again. You see when I click save, that icon flashes a little bit brighter for a moment and then comes back. Of course, those are icons we made in a video a little while ago. Okay, so now we have two things saved. Let's go ahead and make a screen where we can see the results of this. So I'm going to click on Add Screen, and we're going to call this one Saved Plants, and I'm going to choose OK. Okay, we're going to go to Designer View, and we're going to put, we could put a list view or a spinner here, or maybe even a list picker. There's several options we can use that will display multiple results. For our purposes, list view will work great. So I'm going to grab this list view. We're going to give it fill parent. We're just going to basically make this consume the entire screen and fill parent again. Okay, now for storage, that TinyDB is the same throughout our entire application. So I'm going to drop the TinyDB, and let's go ahead and rename it to specimens again and choose OK. Okay, and now what I want to do is go to blocks view. And you know what? Oh, you know, I missed something, didn't I? Because I didn't rename that list view. So let me go to the list view and rename, and we're going to say list of specimens. Remember, if we're programming against it, it's always a good idea to change the name of the components that we have on our screen. So I go to blocks, and I'm going to say list of specimens. And what do we have here? We have list of specimens elements, or elements from string. Either of these will work. First, though, I need to initialize this list of elements as soon as the screen opens. So I actually have to go to the screen itself and pull out this initialize handler here. Now, what do I mean by initialize handler? What I mean is, as soon as this screen loads, this is the first event that's going to fire, and this is where we initialize any UI components on our screen. So we want to initialize the values that are going to be in that list. But where are those values going to come from? Well, they're going to come from our specimens database. Okay? Now, there could be multiple values, so I'm going to need to iterate over what's in that specimens database. Do you remember what iterate means? Iterate means perform the same action on a collection of items. So to iterate, we're going to need to go to Control, and we can say for each item in list. Okay? Now, what are we iterating over? Well, remember those unique names that we stored into the database? Those are called tags. And we can get all of the tags by saying call specimen.getTags, just like so. Okay, now what do we do with the tags? Well, let's go back to the specimens, and you see that there is a getValue attribute. So what we can do with the tags then is we can get the values that are associated with those tags. In other words, get the values that are associated with the names that we set over here in this big block before. You see how we set tag as to plant name, value to store as this long set of strings? We're trying to retrieve this long set of strings based on this tag name. And in our saved plant screens, we're getting all of the tag names that we can iterate over. Iterate to perform the same activity over a list of data. Okay, so I'm going to assemble this a lot. I realize there's a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to assemble this in pieces. First, I'm going to grab this getValue thing. We need to know what our tag is. Our tag is going to be this item here. Okay, in other words, this block we're going to execute over and over again, one for each item in the database. Each time we iterate, we're going to take the key, or the tag, we're going to store it into this variable called item. We take that variable called item, we put it in this block to get the value that's associated with that tag. Now what do we do with that value? We go to list of specimens and we say set list of specimens elements from string. We attach these two together. So in other words, we're taking that long string and we're populating our list from it. Now we'll go ahead and snap all this together here. Okay, once again, initialize method, what initializes the screen, iterate over every record in the database, get the key or the name or the tag, whatever you want to call it. Use getValue to take that tag and get this corresponding string value that's associated with that. Take that string value, put it in our list of specimens. Now, one more thing we need to do, we need to actually navigate to this screen, which we haven't done yet. Let me go back to our GPS screen and let's figure out how we're going to do that. Well, if you remember, we have a little kind of like a file, like an open file icon. We're going to use that to go to this list. So this is called, well, it should be btn open. It's brn open. So I'm gonna fix that. We'll call it btn open. We need to put together a handler for this. So go to blocks view. Okay, and let's take a look for that btn value, or btn open rather. I'll grab that. btn open click means we've clicked on that button. And now what we want to do is we want to open a screen. Okay, so I scroll down and we say open another screen. And what's the name of the screen? For this, we're going to type the name of the screen in just a string literal. So we have to be very careful. This one's called saved plants, capital S, capital P. We have to be very careful that we keep that spelled correctly. It has to be spelled exactly the same. So saved plants. Okay. And now, if everything works well, when we click on the open button, it should take us to that list screen. The list will show us all of the plants that we've saved. So the emulator's running now. I go ahead and click the open button and let's see what we get. It's jumping over to our list of specimens. It'll take just a moment to render. Okay, and you see, sure enough, we do get a list. We did navigate to the other screen as we were hoping. But one thing's a bit disappointing. It's only showing the last item on our list. And that's a little flaw in how I designed this, so I need to fix something here. Elements from string, it wants a comma-separated list, which I haven't given it. I've just given it one string at a time. What we're going to do is we're going to make an actual list of items, and then we're going to add that list of items separately to the list component that's on our screen. That probably sounds confusing. I completely understand. So let's just visualize it. First of all, I'm going to take the set method. I'm going to take it down here. Next, I'm going to go to lists, and I'm going to say create empty list. We need to do this in a couple of parts. So we're going to say set, and we'll say plant list. Whoops, nope, sorry, wrong one. I'm going to go back to variables, and I'm going to say initialize local. Let's take that out here. Initialize local plant list 2, and then we'll say create empty list. Okay. Now remember our scope problem where this is only in scope for this little block right here, and I actually need to access the list for these two items here. So let me drag that entire chunk up, kind of rearrange things a bit. Okay, so we're initializing something called plant list, and then we're iterating over our database. We need to take what's in our database and put it in this plant list. Okay, so I go back to lists, and I'm going to say add item to list. Okay, and what's the list? Plant list. Okay, there we go. And what are we adding to the plant list? The value we've taken out of the database as we designed it earlier. Okay, now what do we do with the list? Let's go to our list again. We're going to say, I'll tell you what, we'll just access it as a variable. We'll grab our get plant list, and instead of elements from string, we're going to change this to elements. I think either one would work, to be honest with you. Okay, deep breath, what have we done? We've created a list variable. We iterate over our database. We add items one at a time to the list. we take the list and we associate that with our user interface list, the list component. And I realize we have two things called list here, but we're talking about the list component that's on our user interface, the list of specimens. Okay, pull from the database, put into a list in memory, associate that list with our user interface list of specimens here. Let's see how that works. So I bring the emulator up, I click the open button again, and sure enough now, we see two items in our list. The eastern redbud we added first and the red maple we added later. Now, we probably want to do a little more math and take out these /t's and replace them with physical tabs or spaces or something like that, because right now it's not very readable. But this video, our purpose was purely to store in a TinyDB and then retrieve from that and put that into a list. So in our next video, we'll do a bit of refactoring, we'll do a bit of cleaning up, and we'll see how we can fix this list. I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you.